So by the 19th century, we have contracts that we can look at. And they're not very numerous, but there are enough of them so that we can use them to trace what happens to some women and how they manage to live. The one I'm looking at here is a contract to sell again, a mulatto slave, enslaved woman for $200. And it's dated, let's see, 1809. So the early part of the 19th century. And what's curious about this document is that that's a fairly low price, as we know from other slave sales in that period. Mm-hmm. And we probably can assume from that that this is not a particularly young woman. But we also know that at the date that this sale happens, slavery in New York, which is where the contract is written, had been abolished or was beginning to be phased out. Mm-hmm. And that therefore this woman would have been freed within, 16 or 17 years, right, in any event. But when we look on the back of this, we discover that, in fact, Robert Fulton, who has bought this enslaved woman, purchased the right anyway to use her, also agrees that within 6 years she will get her freedom. And to some extent, that might account for the low price that she was sold for. Robert Fulton, do we know who Robert Fulton was?
Sure. Robert Fulton is one of the great figures of American history. He's the inventor of the steamship.
So this is the Robert?
This is, in fact, the Robert Fulton.
And did we know that Robert Fulton was a slave owner?
It has not been generally remarked upon. Certainly none of the classic biographies of Fulton have lingered on his slave ownership. But among the things that's interesting about this document is the fact that it's certainly the connection to Fulton that has made it survive for another 210 years or so. So this is in the Robert Fulton Papers, one of the papers at an archive dedicated to creating and preserving records related to the lives of famous American men primarily. But here's a case where this one document about the life of this woman, Jane Betts, has survived because of her connection to Robert Fulton.
So Jane was lucky, or she didn't know she was lucky or unlucky, or we as historians are lucky, right, because this document survives only because it was related to that of an important male. Unlike the coroner's report we saw earlier, where that document survived probably because she was alone and without help.
Right, and so this is another strategy, another means to find the voices of women in the archives, is that as men of property accumulate records about their wealth, about their possessions, certainly in the early 19th century, in the North and South, that included the ownership of other humans. And I also think, as a historical question, this is the age of gradual emancipation in New York. Robert Fulton, on the back of this document, promises to give Jane her freedom. And so that contradiction between someone who's purchasing an enslaved person, taking advantage of her labor, and then promising to set her free eventually, that's a common event in this period, and it makes the study of these people rather complex. The other thing is that Fulton died before the 6-year term expired. So in fact, there's no way to know if that promise was honored, or perhaps someone could find out, but we do not know if his promise to Jane Betts was honored. So again, a document that raises more questions than answers, but is, almost certainly the only or one of very few records of Jane's life that exists.